Today's daf is Kuf Yud Dalid, and we are in daf Kuf Yud Gimel Amid Beis 113 B at the bottom. And the Gemara is listing certain attributes of people or things, and the Gemara says, Shiva Menudim Lashamay. There are 7 based on what they do. They're sort of detached or in a way, sent away from Shamayim. Sort of an excommunication kind of thing. This is about 10 lines from the bottom, the second word in of 113b of Kuf Yud Gimel Amid Beis. Shiva Menudim L'Shamayim Elohim Yehudi She'ein Lo Isha. So it says a Jew that doesn't have a wife. It's interesting that obviously the Gemara is talking about a Jew. Why does it say a Jew? And so in the old, in most of the old prints and the old manuscripts, it's not there. And this was inserted by the Catholic censors. Since it said that somebody who doesn't have a wife is excommunicated from Shemayim, from heaven. So they didn't want that to be in the text. So they added a Jew, a Yehudi that's not married. And someone who has a wife but has no children. Somebody has children and doesn't teach them Torah. Somebody doesn't have tefillin. But tefillin is right, tefillin on his hands, on his arm. With tzitzis bebigdai and tzitzis on his clothing. And a mezuzah on his doorway. And as the Rashbam and the Mefarshim explain, all this is by someone who doesn't care about the mitzvah to try and make an effort to acquire them. Obviously, if somebody tries, then there would not be a menuda l'shamayim. It's somebody who doesn't give it an effort. The Gemara continues and says, and also somebody who withholds shoes from his feet. And some say it also includes someone who has the opportunity to be at a sudas mitzvah, at a meal that is celebrating a mitzvah, whether a bris or a wedding, that's an appropriate wedding, or a siyum meseches, somebody that's celebrating Torah, and they'll take that opportunity. So that in and of itself is going to be a lost opportunity, a lost mitzvah opportunity. Amar Rabba Bar Chama, Amar Shmuel Bar Marta, Amar Rav, Mishum Rabbi Yossi Ish Hutzel. In the name of Rabbi Yossi Ish Hutzel, a man of Hutzel. Minayin Shen Sherlim Bekaldim. How do you know that you can't go to the Chaldeans, which essentially is a group of people, but they used to be a sorcerer, stargazers? So how do you know that you can't go to the Chaldeans? Shenema, for it says, Tamim tihiyeh Hashem alekecha. You shall be complete. You shall be whole with Hashem. In other words, there the Torah is telling us that don't seek out the future. The reason why you need to know the future is because you have a lack of faith in that Hashem will bring about goodness in the world, and that you just have to do your job. So that's a form of being complete with Hashem. Rabbi Yossi Ish Hutzel said another thing. How do you know that if you know about someone else that they are greater than you in one manner, that you should honor them? Shenema, for it says, and this is in Daniel, it says, Kol kabel de ruach yasei rabei, on account of that he had a greater spirit of chachma, of wisdom with him. Omalka ashis lakem, I say, and the king has decided to give him a position of power. Al kamachusa. Therefore, on the kingdoms, you see that the king itself, the king who's powerful, recognized a certain attribute that he is greater, and in that gave him power on account of it. And so too, for sure, we should look at people, see what they're great in, and honor them on account of that accomplishment or that attribute. And also someone who gave birth, a woman who gave birth, and there's a concept of dam tor in the Torah, that if a woman gives birth, part of the time she's the bleeding from the childbirth would be considered nida, and part of the time it would be dam tor, where even though that she's still bleeding, that she would not be nida on account of that. And so the 40th day or 80th day is the last day for a boy or a girl, respectively. And the Rabbi Tzvi Fischer said, since she continues to bleed on that day, don't have relations that night, because it could be that she'll continue to bleed, and that would be nida already that night. Sa'ad kama. So how long should that separation be? How long should they abstain? Amarav oina, 1 period. 1 period means either from nightfall to morning or morning to nightfall, and so that's the period that one day, one night. So now the Gemara tells us a little bit this about Rabbi Yosef Ish Hutzal. Tana hu Yosef Ish Hutzal. His name is Yosef Ish Hutzal, as well as Hu Yosef Abavli. He's Yosef the Babylonian. He's also known as Hu Isi ben Gur Aryeh. He's also known as Isi, the son of the lion cub. Hu Isi ben Yehuda. Hu Isi ben Gamliel. Hu Isi ben Mahalalel. Hamashamai. So what is his real name? Isi ben Akavia Shemai. Isi ben Akavia Shemai. And he was named different names based on where he was or what he was doing. The Gemara now mentions, now that we mentioned someone had multiple names, the Gemara also says, who Rabbi Yitzchak ben Tavlu, Rabbi Yitzchak ben Chaklu, Rabbi Yitzchak ben Elazar. That Rabbi Yitzchak, son of Rabbi Elazar, was also known as Rabbi Yitzchak ben Tavlu, Rabbi Yitzchak ben Chaklu. And now we go to Kuf Yudalid, and the Gemara says that when you see that the name Rabbi Yitzchak, without mentioning his father, if it's in a halachic manner, halachic matter, meaning it's a shmaitza. So Rabbi Yitzchak ben Acha, the shmaitza, that when you see a mention of Rabbi Yitzchak, the name, his father's name would be Rabbi Acha if the subject matter is halachic. Rabbi Yitzchak ben Pinchas, the Agadita, and if it's an unattributed, meaning it's a statement of Rabbi Yitzchak without saying who the father is, in a manner of Agadaic teaching, of Agadita, there we say it's Rabbi Yitzchak ben Pinchas. The Simonech, and the way to remember it is based on a pasuk. It says Shimu na Achai, that's our text, but it's Shimu Achai V'Reai. Remember, listen, my brothers and my friends. So in by Shmaitasa, that tells us by Shimu, which is Shmaitasa, it's Achai. Now, this is just a little bit of etymology here. Halachic matters are called Shmaitasa, and the esoteric or ethical teachings are called Agadita. And the reason the Rishonim say is because Ishmatasa means something we heard. These are the traditions that we actually heard from Sinai, from the halacha that's passed on. So it's called Shmata, that which we heard. However, when we're telling stories, when the Gemara is telling stories in order to teach a lesson, it's metaphor and ethical teachings based on this. So these are agadita. These are new ideas being told. They're stories. They're agadita. And so therefore, that's the distinction here. And it says in the verse, Shim'u achai v're'ai. Listen, my brothers. So the Rabbi Yitzchak ben Acha, which means Rabbi Yitzchak, the son of brother, is the one of Shmata, is the one who is in the matters of halacha. Okay, Amar Rabbi Babachan Rabbi Yochanan, Mishmei Rabbi Yehuda ben Rabbi Eloi. Another teaching from one of the Chachamim in regards to some ethical or advice idea. Achol batzel, eat onions, v'shev batzel, and be able to sit in your house. In other words, don't buy lavish food and then you can't pay rent and you have to lose your home. Rather, eat onions, eat cheap, and be able to live at home. Don't get used to eating duck and chicken. And then your heart's going to cause you to run after it. Take less to eat and expand your home. When Ula came from Eretz Yisrael, Amar matla matla memarov. There's a proverb that they say in Eretz Yisrael. The achila lisa tashiba lisa. Somebody eats the fattiest food from the tail is going to end up living in the attic. The achli kakuli akikli the masa shachiv. Somebody who eats vegetables, they'll end up being able to live amongst the people because he's not afraid of the debt and hiding out in his attic. That's the end of that Haggadah. Now we come back to the main ideas of this parak, which is the Seder. So the first Mishnah, which all this was going on, is dealing with prep for Pesach, how to eat Erev Pesach, and that everybody has to be ready to eat and to lean and have 4 cups. And now it begins with the order, the Seder, meaning the order of the 4 cups. So they pour and dilute the first cup, as we mentioned many times. Whenever it talks about a cup of broth and drinking it, it talks about diluting it, mazgulai, and the reason is because their wine was diluted 3 parts to 1. So mazgulai kesrishon, they diluted the first cup. So he's going to make kiddush. And now we get a machlokas of what's the order of kiddush. Beis Shammai say you're going to say kiddush, and then you're going to end with borei pri hagafen. However, Beis Hillel and Beis Hillel say mevarach al yayin. First you say borei pri hagafen, the blessing on wine, and then you say the kiddush hayom, the blessing of the day. And as you know, and the Gemara is going to tell us, we follow that. We say Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam borei pri hagafen, and then we go into kiddush. Tanarabah. So the Brisa taught Dvarim shebei Beis Shammai Beis Hillel b'Suda. Here are some of the matters that are distinct between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel in the rules of a meal. So Beis Shammai say you first say kiddush, the blessing for kiddush, and then you say bar pri hagafen. So it's all what we call kiddush, but the bracha of kiddush, the bracha and the sanctification of the day, we say first, and then bar pri hagafen. And the reason is mipnei shahiyun garm liyayin shiyavet. Why do I even have a cup of wine? On account of it's a special day. So first say the blessing on the main focus of that, which is the sanctification of the day, and then say the bracha on the wine, because the wine is only coming because of the sanctification of the day, because of the kiddush. Another argument, and besides, and besides, you're making kiddush. Shabbos, Yantif has already come in, and you've already encountered Yantif, so you have to say the blessing for it. The wine only comes after that, so say the bracha on that which you encountered first. So two arguments, similar but different. Beis Hillel say the bracha on the wine, and only afterwards you say the bracha on the kiddush. Because it's only on account that you have the wine that you can say the kiddush, as we know that we saw earlier, Shira al yayin and Zachreu al yayin. The song praise is said on wine, and the remembrance of Shabbos and Yantiv is said on wine, and so you need the wine. So you have to say the bracha on the wine first. Tavarach, another interpretation. Birchas hayayin tadira, birchas hayayin tadira. Also, because the wine is a constant. That's a bracha that's appropriate every single day. Whereas the bracha of Kiddush is only appropriate at that moment, at that time, once, twice, 3 times a year. It's not Kiddush or Yantif. Pesach is just a couple of Kiddushes. Obviously, it's not every day. So this is more constant. So you're going to say the bracha on wine which is more constant. Because as a rule we say, tadir, v'shei no tadir, that which is constant versus that which is not, tadir kodem, the more constant, it comes first. And we learn this from the daily carbon, the tamid, which comes before the musaf, because the daily tamid is tamid, it's constant, it's daily. And so that comes more, that takes precedence. So we learn that anytime you have two mitzvahs, two brachas, or whatever it may be, one is a constant, one is a more typical, and one is less, you're going to do the one that is daily or constant, the more constant, before you do the one that is not. The Gemara says, and the halacha is like Beis Hillel. So my davaracha. So first of all, the Gemara says, why do we need another explanation, a second reason for Beis Hillel? He already told us the reason. The Gemara says, because maybe you would say, Hasam tarti v'achachada. Beis Shammai have two reasons to say the Kiddush first. Beis Hillel only has one reason to say the bracha on Yain bar Pri Hagafim first. So why do we follow them? Hachanami tarti nenu. So we say, no, they also have a second reason because of tadir v'sheina tadir kodem, that the more constant comes first. And the halacha is like Beis Hillel. The Gemara says, Pshita. That's obvious. We already know that the Hanafik Baskol, a heavenly voice came out and said, the halacha is like Beis Hillel. Well, maybe this statement of the halacha like Beis Hillel is prior to the heavenly voice. Or it's after the heavenly voice. Rabbi Yeshua, and Rabbi Yeshua says that still it's because even though we had a heavenly voice say the halacha is like Beis Hillel, we don't follow Beis Hillel on account of a heavenly voice. We follow Beis Hillel on account of that they were the majority. And why did we need a heavenly voice then? Because the students of Beis Shammai would argue, true that you are greater in number, but in our academy we have the sharpest minds, and so the halacha should be like us. In any case, the halacha is like the majority, and so over here too, the halacha is, and this is what we do: we say bar Pri Hagafim and then Kiddush. The next Mishnah deals with the first part of the Seder that comes after Kiddush. So normally, immediately after Kiddush, you have to have the meal. And by the Seder, we first have to have the telling of the Haggadah upon the matzah, before you have the matzah, because the matzah that we eat, the Gemara is going to tell us, and we saw earlier, lechem sha'onin alav devarim harbe. It's bread, meaning matzah, that you say upon it, Dvarim Harbe, many teachings. So this teaching of this obligation of Haggadah is not a break between the Kiddush and the meal, because it's a part of what's necessary for the meal. Now, but we also do things in order to engage the children, because the mitzvah of telling of the story is to tell it to tell it to the next generation, to tell it to your children. And the Torah says it in a way that your children will ask you questions. So we engage the children so that they ask questions. So the first thing we do is we bring out vegetables to dip, and as the Gemara is going to tell us, this is really just to pique their interest and say, wait, that's not what we do. Normally we make Kiddush and we go straight to the meal, and here you're bringing out some vegetables to dip. That's odd. What's up? What's going on? So that's what we call karpas. And we dip it, as you know, either in vinegar or salt water. However, we're going to see that all of these things are not as simple as in the Mishnah. So Vilofanav, so they bring before him the table or the vegetables, and he now has to dip. So metabel, so he's going to dip it, and even if all he has is lettuce, which is really going to be used later for maror, he can also use that for karpas. Now, in the Mishnah, it doesn't use the term karpas. Karpas really is a specific vegetable. It's a celery. But there are other vegetables mentioned in petrozelia, which is parsley, and kusbarta, which is kusbara, and So there are other vegetables mentioned. The idea, the Rishonim say, is that it's a vegetable that has somewhat of a bitter taste because it's reminding us of the bitter work. In any case, in the Mishnah it says you use that even if you have chazeres, even if you have all you have is lettuce, you would use that and dip it. Until you actually have it after the bread, where you're also going to bring the vegetable, and there it's coming on account of mar, where that's sort of like going to be the salad part of the meal, where you, after you eat bread, the matzah, you're going to bring a vegetable to dip. So that's sort of the equivalent to salad, which is the parperes hapas. And then they bring in front of him the Seder plate, which has upon it the matzah and the lettuce for maror and the charoses for dipping in the maror, and the two cooked objects, which one is, the Gemara is going to tell us, is a remembrance of the Pesach, which we don't have, and one is a remembrance of the Chagiga, which would come along with the Pesach, in order to make sure that people are satiated before they eat the Pesach, because Pesach is Nechal ala Soiva. We talked about this earlier. So there's two cooked items as a remembrance of that on the Seder plate. And the Gemara says that even though mitzvah, even though charosis is not a mitzvah, nevertheless, we bring it because it's a part of the enhancement of the maror, as we'll see later, and the Gemara explains it. However, he says mitzvah. No, it is a mitzvah to have charosas, and the Gemara will explain. Well, the mikdash, and in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, where they had the carbon Pesach, this is the moment that we bring the carbon Pesach after dipping the vegetable. They bring the carbon Pesach. Now, the Rashbam points out that it says only after he dipped the vegetable that they brought the Seder plate with matzah and charosas on it, and matzah, lettuce, and charosas. So it's seemingly the first dipping is not in charosas. So Rabbeinu Tam says that the dipping was done in salt water or vinegar. However, it's important to note, Tosfos points out that Rashi, and even before him, Rabbi Yosef Tov Elim, who was a 10th century halachist and poet, wrote in the poetry, in the liturgical poetry, in the liturgy for Shabbos Hagadol, that we dip the karpas in charosas. So clearly, at least there was once that custom, and Rabbeinu Tam says, based on Rashbam over here in the Mishnah, since the Mishnah says only afterwards you bring the charosas, that you don't dip it in charosas yet. Only the second, the maror, that you dip in charosas. Okay, so now we turn the page to the Gemara. Amar Reish Lakish. So Reish Lakish says, based on our Mishnah, which says that even though you're supposed to have any vegetable, if the only vegetable you have is lettuce, you can do it and dip it for karpas. Well, he's got a problem. So then you've already fulfilled the mitzvah of maror. You're supposed to eat maror, and you ate maror, you ate the lettuce, so you fulfill the mitzvah. Why would you then later, after you eat the matzah, eat the maror and say, bracha, barachat Hashem, Elokeinu melech haolam, asher kedeshanu, commanded us in the mitzvah? You've already done the mitzvah. You've eaten the chasa, you've eaten the lettuce. Amar Reish Lakish. So Reish Lakish says, from the fact that you can still say the bracha later and have the mitzvah later, we see that mitzvah tzrichas kavanah, that in order to fulfill a mitzvah, you have to have intent. And therefore, if your intention was not to fulfill the mitzvah of maror, but to fulfill the custom of karpas, so then you haven't fulfilled the mitzvah, and so therefore you can still say the bracha later. But if you follow the opinion, as we'll see later, there is such an opinion, that mitzvahs einan tzrichas kavanah, a mitzvah does not require intent, as long as you did the mitzvah, even if you did so without the classic intent, or even if you were forced, if that's a fulfillment, so over here too, you should have fulfilled the mitzvah already, and it would be too late to eat the maror later and say the bracha. You've already fulfilled the mitzvah. So he explains, since it's not the time of eating the maror, that's when he's eating it, meaning at karpas, which is not the time that he means to fulfill the mitzvah. But the only bracha he made was Borei Pri Adama. You thank you Hashem for the fruit of the ground. So clearly, I'm not intending a mitzvah because I would have said a mitzvah bracha. Rather, I'm just intending to eat a vegetable. So I'm just eating a vegetable. And therefore, we can see from our Mishnah that mitzvahs einon tzrichas kavana. That mitzvahs require an intent, and without intent, you don't fulfill the mitzvah. The Gemara says, well, perhaps, but also perhaps not. But dilma loyechavin lamar, hilkach ba'ilam heder matbuli l'shemar. Sorry, where are we? Maybe he didn't have intent, and so therefore he has to do another dipping in the name of Mar. Mitzvah, but not because it's a mitzvah to do so. Because if you say that you don't need, that mitzvahs don't require intent, so then why would he need to dip it a second time if the first time he already ate chasa? So Gemara says, he already dipped it one time. Gemara says, no, this is not a good proof to Reish Lakish. Perhaps I could tell you indeed, in truth, mitzvahs do not require intent. And therefore, indeed, the first time round, he would have fulfilled the mitzvah of mar if he ate lettuce, if he ate celery or radish or parsley. So fine. So then he fulfilled karpas. He didn't fulfill mar because mar has certain requirements, as we saw. But if all he had was lettuce and he used that, so he would have fulfilled the mitzvah because you don't need intent. The kadma is straight to buli lomeli. But then you said, so why did we have to re-dip it after matzah? In order to get the children intrigued by what's going on here. So that's the reason. Well, if that's the case, why didn't the Mishnah just tell us the classic, that he used a different vegetable for karpas, for dipping, and then he's going to eat the lettuce as maror later on? Because I may have thought, perhaps if I don't have any other vegetables, the only vegetable I have at home is lettuce, so then I wouldn't have to do two dippings, because the one dip is only if I have parsley, or only if I have karpas, which is celery, or only if I have radish. But if I have lettuce, if all I have is lettuce, then I wouldn't do the dipping, because it's only there to get the kids intrigued. And I don't have a vegetable for that, and I can't eat the maror because the maror is later. So therefore, if I don't have another vegetable besides for lettuce, I won't dip twice. Even if all I have is lettuce, I need to make a double dip. In order for the children to recognize the uniqueness of tonight and ask questions which will fulfill the Torah obligation of telling the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim as a response to questions. And besides, we also have a brisa that says achlan demai yotza. If somebody eats the vegetables as demai, he fulfills the obligation. Demai is when somebody bought vegetables in the marketplace and is not sure whether the seller actually tithed it. He took meiser. So the halacha is he shouldn't really eat it without tithing it himself. However, if he did, he will have fulfilled the mitzvah. And the reason is because the halacha is a poor person is allowed to eat the mai even without tithing, and a guest is allowed to eat without tithing. And so this person essentially could make himself poor. So that means this is produce that is valid for the mitzvah. Simply, he has a rabbinic obligation of taking tithes. So that doesn't invalidate the mitzvah, so fulfill the mitzvah. And also the Mishnah, the Brisa says, Achlan b'loy miskaven yatsa. If you ate it without intent, you just ate lettuce thinking that it's a salad, and didn't realize that it's time for a mitzvah or that this is a mitzvah. Actually, for a Seder, you come in as a guest. Okay, they give out lettuce after the matzah. Like, all right, that was a dry cracker. I can use some lettuce. Any dressing for this? Yeah, sure. We got some sweet charoses dressing. All right, sure. And you eat it, not knowing that it's a mitzvah. This brisa says you fulfill the mitzvah. Also, if you ate some of it, stopped and ate another bit, you also fulfill the obligation of as long as you don't wait the amount of time that it takes to eat a portion of bread, which we say is about 5 minutes, but it could be as quick as 2.5 minutes and as long as 9 minutes. So this is called achilas pras. In order for something to count as a single eating session, it has to be that there wasn't a break of achilas pras between one eating and the other. So if somebody ate, so the requisite amount of maror is an olive size, and somebody ate a half olive size and took a break for a few minutes and ate another olive size, half olive size, they will fulfill the obligation because they will have a complete olive size, even though they essentially took a 2-minute break. Nevertheless, that's going to be considered kedei achilas pras, within the amount of time that it takes to eat a piece of bread, a portion of bread, and therefore it counts as one eating. In any case, the middle statement of this brisa tells us that that you don't need intent for eating the maror. So you see clearly that you fulfill the mitzvah of maror even without intent, and that Rish Lakish is incorrect. You should have fulfilled the obligation immediately as you ate the lettuce for karpas. So Tanoi, the Gemara says, indeed, this is a machlokes Tanoim. The Tani we learned. Rabbi Yossi Omer Alfa Pishet Tibel b'Chazeres Mitzvah Lav Lefanam Chazeres v'Chareisa Shnei Tavshin. Rabbi Yossi says clearly, even though that he used lettuce and dipped it, there's a mitzvah to bring before him the lettuce and the charoses and the two cooked items. So the Gemara at first says, well, maybe only to engage the kids, and the Gemara say no. It says it's a mitzvah. So maybe he follows the opinion that you don't need intent. And the reason why you bring lettuce again, it's in order to engage the children so that they are intrigued and notice some differences. The Gemara says, my mitzvah. So then you wouldn't say it's a mitzvah to bring the lettuce back, because mitzvah indicates that there's an actual obligation. Well, that's true for maror, because the Torah says, al matzos u'marorim yachlu, you have to eat maror. And even if when you don't have the Korban Pesach, the eating the maror is a remembrance of that mitzvah, but it's still a part of the mitzvah. It's in the Torah. Karpas, that's not a mitzvah. The doing interesting things at the Seder to engage the children, that's not a mitzvah. That's a good thing to do. So then it would just say, mevi'in lefanav, and you bring before him another lettuce, like it says at the beginning of our Mishnah when it brings the karpas. It doesn't say mitzvah la'avi, you have to bring, but rather mevi'in lefanav, they would bring in front of him. That's what was done. So we see that from Rabbi Yossi, the fact that he says it's a mitzvah, that means that eating the lettuce first time around that he had dipped during karpas is not the fulfillment of the mitzvah, because you need intent. So Rabbi Yossi's opinion is what Reish Lakish follows and finds our Mishnah to be evidence of proof to Rabbi Yossi, and the brisa, the other brisa says no, that you can fulfill the mitzvah even without intent. And this is a classic halachic discussion about many topics in halacha. That mitzvahs shrichas kavana, do we hold that mitzvahs require intent, and if you didn't have intent, you did not fulfill the mitzvah? Or do we say mitzvahs ein shrichas kavana, that no, that the halacha is you do not require intent? And generally we say that you do need intent, and the question is, where can you fulfill the mitzvah even without intent? The Pnei Yeshua and the Chassam Sofer here, they say that there's a distinction to be made between a mitzvah that is of no physical benefit, such as blowing of the shofar, or other shaking the lulav. It's a nice sentiment, but it doesn't have a personal benefit. So therefore, you need intent. Whereas eating, something that you fulfill the mitzvah by eating. So you have a benefit regardless. Therefore, even without intent, you fulfill the mitzvah. Many discussions, halach, about it. We don't have the time, obviously, for that, but it is a classic sugya, a classic subject matter in halacha. Mitzvahs strichas kavanah, do mitzvahs require intent? The Gemara now addresses shnei tavshilin. My shnei tavshilin. What are these two cooked foods that you need? Do you need to have a lamb because to remember the Pesach, and another piece of meat or a bone in order to remember the Chagiga? Amar Rav Huna silka v'aruz. Rav Huna says no. Even selek, you can even have beets and rice, two cooked objects, two food, actual meal objects. Now we'll talk, if we get a moment, about rice on Pesach. But first, let's finish the daf. So Rava have a mahada silka v'aruz. So Rava, even though that it would be better to have a piece of meat on the Seder plate, nevertheless, Rava would put beets and rice in order to in order to show that the halach is like his teacher, who had said that as an example. It was just an example, but nevertheless he would do that. However, nothing can prove the Rav Huna, since Rav Huna had said that. Hamar Rav Ashi Shmami, no, the Rav Huna. So from Rav Huna's statement, we can learn no one is concerned with the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. Even though we learned earlier that there are 5 grains that you can make your matzah out of: wheat, barley, spelt, rye, and oat. The rice is not included. It's not something that would actually ferment and become sourdough. However, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri is of the opinion that you could fulfill the mitzvah of matzah with rice, and it does count as chametz on Pesach. And since Rav Huna said, "Well, what are you going to put on the Seder plate? Rice," you see that he's not even concerned about that opinion at all. The Tanya, as we learned, Oris is a type of dagan, rice is a type of dagan, and therefore if you have a fermented rice on, meaning a rice dough on Pesach, it's kares, it's punishable with soul being cut off from its source, like regular chametz. And you can fulfill the obligation with matzah made of rice. And to that he says no. Nobody is even concerned about that. Chizkiah says, actually, this that we said you need 2 cooked items. It doesn't have to be 2 individual cooked items. You can even have a piece of fish, and you have a egg coating on it. That too would count as 2 cooked items. Rav Yosef says no, you need 2 pieces of meat. One for Pesach and one for the Chagiga. Ravina Ama Afilu Garma Bishula. And Ravina says, even if you have a piece of meat and the soup, so you have a beef broth or a lamb broth, so the meat counts as one cooked item and the broth is the other. In any case, the Gemara says, it's clear if somebody has other vegetables, if you have lettuce instead of lettuce, meaning you have either celery or radish, or more modern people take potatoes or parsley. So it really potatoes is questionable because the Rishonim would say it should be something that is somewhat sharp or somewhat bitter. In any case, but people do take potatoes because we're not used to eating some of the other vegetables. But either way, if you have other vegetables, of course, that's the appropriate thing for karpas, to take that and say bar priyadam v'achil. And later, when you eat the mar, you're going to say the bracha. You Hashem, thank you for sanctifying us and making us and commanding us with eating mar. Well, what happens if you only have lettuce? So Rav Huna says you're going to eat the lettuce for karpas, but you're only going to say borei priyadam. Later, when you're going to eat the maror after matzah as a part of the meal, then you're going to say the bracha on achilas maror. In other words, that you do not fulfill the mitzvah by eating karpas, and you're going to make the bracha later. And tomorrow we'll continue with that idea. But what we have in front of us over here is a few of the customs. We have number one, karpas, that you're going to take a vegetable, and it should be a vegetable that has some bitterness or sharpness, because we're remembering this slavery, and you dip it into either vinegar or salt water. Our custom generally is salt water, and originally there may have been a custom to dip it in karpas, but our custom for sure for 1,000 years, or many times nearly 1,000 years ago, is to dip it in salt water. And it should be a different vegetable, not lettuce. But if you have lettuce, that's the only vegetable you have to dip, so you're going to use that to dip. Now, there's also two cooked items. Customarily, it's an egg, a roasted egg, to remember the chagiga, and also a bone to remember Hashem's outstretched arm, that the term the Torah uses for Hashem saving us. And that is often used as a lamb shank bone or a chicken wing, whatever it may be. The custom. Some people specifically don't use beef or lamb, only chicken. Some do, and that's a matter of custom. What the Gemara had told us was that you would eat that on the Seder plate you could even have rice, and that we're not concerned with the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan Nuri, who had said that rice really is one of the is a regular chametz. So why don't we have rice as Ashkenazim? And that's a different thing. This is the custom of kitnios, which has been accepted for many, many generations, hundreds and hundreds of years. And the basis for that is that rice, it looks like the other grains, wheat and barley, and they are often kept together in storage houses or in granaries, and there's a chance that the chametz would come into it and you wouldn't notice it. And then you have chametz in your house. Not only in your house, you have chametz in your cooked food. And not only that, you may have eaten it. And the severity of chametz is such that the custom was accepted upon all Ashkenazi communities not to eat legumes, not to eat kitnios, as well as rice. And as such, that minhag that has been accepted for generations is binding, and therefore we don't eat rice. But of course, rice back then, where they would have ability to keep it separate, was eaten classically, and that's why Rav Huna mentions that as something, as a cooked food that can be on the Seder plate. Some Sephardic, or many Sephardic people do eat rice, but they check them 3 times each individual grain before they eat it. So sometimes I think that may be easier not to eat rice than to eat it. All right. Have a great day, everyone. Yashakach.
Yashakach.
Well, too.